Hello, Molweni, Sanu, Hujambo. I'm Thembekile Mrototo, and this is Unwrap Africa, where we focus on the latest news, trends, and successes of the African continent. Siyaqhaqha. And it's our question to you tonight. The president of Cameroon, Paul Biya, been in power since 1982. He is seeking re-election again. So should Africa abolish presidential term limits? Let us know your thoughts on the WhatsApp number, +27 78459 1897. You can also find us on Facebook, by the way, where we are SABC Unwrap Africa, and on X at SABC News_TV. We'll have a look at your thoughts later this hour. Quick roundup of the biggest stories from the African continent this week, and we start with South Africa's ambassador to France, Nathi Mthethwa, who's been laid to rest in a special Category 2 official funeral in Kwambonambi in KwaZulu-Natal this Sunday. He's believed to have fallen to his death from the 22nd floor of a hotel in Paris last week. 6 South African activists who were detained by Israel while trying to reach Gaza as part of an aid flotilla say they were subjected to harsher treatment than other detainees because of South Africa's role in the genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. Ethiopia has accused Eritrea of preparing to wage war against it. It's in the latest sign of escalating tension between the two countries over the control of the Red Sea. In a letter to the United Nations Secretary General, Ethiopia's foreign minister claimed that Eritrea is colluding with the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. Fears of a coup have risen in Madagascar after soldiers joined youth who were protesting this weekend. It's a part of nationwide demonstrations that have started in just the last month in the country. And as thousands of Sudanese refugees return home, they are facing overwhelming challenges amid a worsening humanitarian crisis. A recent report from the UN International Organization for Migration says that by the end of July, more than 1.5 million Sudanese had been displaced internally. That's since January. Renowned Nigerian fashion designer Al Fadi has led a masterclass for students at Rome's Academy of Fashion to celebrate African cotton and design as part of events held by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations to celebrate World Cotton Day, can you believe it, on the 7th of October. So it's the 1960 dream, born in Casablanca, Morocco, where Africa's founding father envisioned an ease of movement across all the states. But more than half a century later, the dream is yet to become reality. In an effort to make that dream reality, then, a group of Pan-Africanists have come together and gone on a journey termed Revolution on Wheels. The aim is to meet heads of governments, civil servants, as well as media in order to advocate at least for visa-free travel in Africa. SABC News correspondent Rapelang Khadebe has more for you.
Africa, unite, 'cause the children wanna go home.
It's full marks to Lesotho as His Majesty King Letsie hosts the Visa-Free Africa campaign team. Lesotho is the 13th of the 39 African countries that this campaign aims to target, under the theme Trans-Africa Tourism and Unity Campaign. Welcome to the Mounted Kingdom. How has your journey been?
Thank you very much, and it's so nice and good to be in Lesotho. So the campaign ostensibly is to promote a visa-free Africa where all African nationals within the continent of Africa and beyond holding African passports can traverse or can travel without the restrictions or requirements of visas. And certainly this is something that we believe would clearly stimulate the economies of the various African countries. It would lead to the creation of jobs. It would lead to the raising of revenue to build infrastructure and essential services. Look, we've got a continent of 1.4 billion people. Our combined GDP is over 3.3 trillion. So the market is enormous. So we started off in Ghana on the 18th of January. Then we went to Togo. Then we went to Benin, then Nigeria, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Republic of Congo, Congo DR, Angola, Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, and currently in incredible Lesotho. And I must tell you, it's had its ups and downs. There were places that had a lot of rough edges, a place like Cameroon. I think they strongly could do better. But I'm excited about the openness of, your immigration officers. It took us less than 15 minutes, to go through immigration and customs.
Perhaps also comment on the fact of travel, especially air travel. It still takes you far too long to get to an African country. It's actually easier to go to Europe.
And it's not just only far to get to an African country from Africa, but one of the absurd things is that sometimes they have to take you out of Africa to come into another African country. Aside that, you also have the high cost of air tickets for Africans. So what we've been advocating throughout all of these places we've been to is that, look, the taxes on the tickets can be reduced. There are enormous benefits that we could derive, just from opening up the borders and dismantling the remnants of colonization.
Why is it so difficult to penetrate and get into, as an Africa, into some of those countries?
I tell you what, Botswana took a while for us to get visas to Botswana. A long while. Even, as a former member of parliament in Ghana, last year when I applied, I got denied. In spite of
Botswana?
In Botswana, in spite of the fact that, at the time of my application, I had done like 85 countries around the world, but my visa was still refused. Cameroon was a nightmare. I mean, we got there with electronic visas and they said they didn't accept electronic visas at the land borders. And we had to drive round trip 10 hours on a rainy day, bad roads, just to go to Nigeria to get visas, just the stamps, and come back to the border. And then when we got to the border, it took us 5 hours to get past the border. When we were exiting, it was another nightmare. They said they didn't work on a Sunday. Lost productivity. I mean, you can't get everybody traveling within weekdays. People have special circumstances. And so it should be easier for Africans to travel on any day of the week. So Cameroon was, very frustrating, but it doesn't take away the fact that their people are nice, their food is good, and they could be doing way better than they are already doing, if they were to get their acts together. Look, we were supposed to be in the capital, Yaoundé, on a Thursday. We ended up getting to Yaoundé on a Saturday late afternoon.
3 days later.
3 days later, as a result of bottlenecks. You get past the border after 5 hours, and there are still stops. One gendarmerie stop and delay after the other. It was exceedingly frustrating. And I say that, look, the Africa we want should have zero place for corruption and for, incessant delays like this.
So that's our question to you this evening. It's election day in Cameroon. 92-year-old President Paul Biya, who's been in power since 1982, is seeking re-election, sparking some controversy. Is it time then to abolish presidential term limits? Let's see what you've been saying. Bramoro says, I will advise Cameroon to rename the country after the president and grant him a lifetime presidency until he decides to step down. At least they won't waste money organizing elections. Mercy says, before we speak of Africa, we must speak of individual countries. Blanketing Africa in conversations is one of the weaknesses of that Africa. Fiwa says, you forgot to mention that he currently rules them from Europe. Basimane says, the citizens of Cameroon must elect a new president for them. They mustn't allow this old man to be imposed on them. So that's how it's looking in terms of your feeling as Cameroonians have been voting this Sunday. We'll have a look at more of your thoughts later. Speaking of things that are coming on the program, we'll speak to South African author Zakes Mda. He's part of a group of writers who, through a class action lawsuit, have been awarded more than $1 billion in the US after a large language model company used their books without permission. He'll give us his view when we come back. Well, Welcome back. This is Unwrap Africa, and tonight we want to bring you a story on the case of Barts versus Anthropic, in which South African author Zakes Mda is among those who will receive compensation after confirmation that 6 of his books were used without his knowledge or consent. It's for a large language model. Let's talk further then about this ruling with Mr. Mda himself. A very good evening to you, sir. Good to have you on the program here on the SABC. So let's put in context what was the issue here and just how unprecedented an outcome this is from the courts in the US.
I didn't get your question, though.
My question to you, sir, was about the legal journey to get to this point and how significant this is for yourselves as authors whose works are being used without permissions or permission, like in this case.
Well, the journey has been long since, September last year, September 2004. But this being, class action, I was not really part of that journey. I was just one of the writers on the list, because this company called Anthropic used about 6 of my novels without my permission, but also without my knowledge. I wouldn't have known this if my agent had not contacted me and informed me of this. Mm-hmm. I learned of it actually for the first time in a newspaper last year, which wrote of one of my books, Ways of Dying, having been used. It's only recently when I learned that it was more than just Ways of Dying, about 5 other books. And by that time, of course, that agreement, because this was an out-of-court settlement, mm-hmm. Anthropic could not or did not wait for the judgment. They made that out-of-court settlement that they are going to settle for $1.5 billion. But of course, one thing that I want to correct, because there's been a lot of sensationalism in the media in South Africa, For instance, there's a headline that says Zakes Mda wins a $1.5 billion lawsuit. Now, that's a distortion. That sensationalism, I think, is done for the sake of clickbait, Mm-hmm. Because this is class action, and it's many writers, thousands of writers, who are sharing that amount.
Right. And I suppose the clarity then there, sir, is we shouldn't all be asking you for a loan now under the understanding or the misunderstanding that you're a dollar billionaire.
And all, exactly, and all those relatives whom I had not even known before should just stay put. They must not know me today.
Let me ask you then.
I don't have any.
I want to ask you then about how you found out basically that your work was being used without permission through your agent. I wonder how common that sort of thing has become with the advances in technology, artificial intelligence, where essentially your intellectual property is being exploited for someone else's gain, and how difficult it's actually become to keep track of that sort of thing.
Well, it is very common. And I only learned because of this case, Barts versus Anthropic. Because many writers, some writers I know in America are in the same boat. Some of them, my former students, because I have hundreds of students in the United States, who are published writers now, their work was used. So it's something very, very common. Mm-hmm. Now, I just also want to clarify one other thing.
Right.
You see, there are many AI companies out there, especially in the United States, large language model companies. Many of them have used our work before, including my work, but they've kept within the doctrine that is known as the fair use doctrine. That is why then they are not affected by this judgment. In the fair use doctrine, you are allowed to use any writer's work, but only a certain amount of that work without any permission. Once you exceed that amount, then of course you must ask for permission. And if there are any fees to be paid, you must pay the fees. In this case of this company called Anthropic, they harvested this work from pirate websites. There are websites out there that publish work without your permission. And of course, if you happen to discover them and you have the means to do so, you can sue them and be compensated for that.
And on that point,
so
Anthropic
then...
Apologies, sir, on the pirate websites, because that's what I found fascinating in reading about this outcome, is that ultimately you've got the owners of Anthropic, who runs this large language model. They are facing this penalty now. But what are the consequences for the pirate sites who basically are using your work more broadly, in fact, without permission, and are the source of this sort of violation?
I think there's going to be legal action on them too. In many instances, you find that some of these websites operate, anonymously, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of, private detectives that you need to employ to dig into the ownership of that site. But for the mere fact that they were able to sue Anthropic, definitely you can be sure that we are going to pursue those websites as well and sue them.
Mr. Zakes Mda, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much. And I know you didn't get the full $1 billion, but congratulations to you as authors then, who've finally been able to get back control to some extent over your incredible works that you've put out over the years. We appreciate your time here on the SABC. This is Unwrap Africa. Much more for you still on the way. Don't go away. The Thembekile Foundation has been celebrating 15 years since its establishment this weekend. To mark the milestone, the foundation opened an exhibition that tells the story of the African continent. Spokesperson for the foundation took us through that exhibition.
The Kuba basket is from the Kuba kingdom in the DRC, and it's a symbol of inclusion, and it's made up of diverse materials and which are used to give and receive sacred objects. And for us, we thought it was important that to have this object as a way of showing that all of us have various gifts to give to each other, and we must keep them sacred and give them to one another and receive them as well. This exhibition draws on the idea of the stone tools, how they used to use them to cut and multiple other things. So what we wanted to do in particular with this object was to show that the silicon that you find in our phones today comes from the soil and comes from stone. And so what we then wanted to do is to then show that the history and our historical tools also have an impact on the future as well. So these future technologies, also this combination between the past and the present, all in this one tool. So what we wanted to do with this particular story was to show that the transmission of our cultures can also take place through music and musical instruments as well. And so we wanted to use the mbira in particular, and you see the mbira right across the continent, but in particular you saw the mbira being utilized in the Zimbabwean struggle across by both men and women in being able to, and historically women were not the people who were allowed to play the mbira. And so what the struggle in Zimbabwe was about was simultaneously the struggle against colonialism, but also this tension amongst culture internally as well. So what we have today are two different kinds of mbiras. One mbira that is tuned in the historical manner, so the traditional manner of playing it, and a second mbira that is tuned in a more modern Western scale as well. So you have different ways of playing, and they sound different as well. So these mbiras for us are important in being able to show the richness of our culture, both through music and also how we're able to utilize music to respond to the social ills around us as well. The foundation celebrates 15 years since its establishment. The foundation was established on the 11th of October right here in Sandton. Beginning today, this is our first event. This exhibition will run for the next 3 weeks here in Sandton City, outside the Checkers here.
A reminder of our question to you this weekend. President Paul Biya in Cameroon, who's been in power since 1982, seeking re-election this weekend. Should Africa abolish presidential term limits or go the opposite direction? Let's see what you're saying. Nono Moss says that the problem of African leaders. Bandile K says if it's working for Cameroon, it doesn't mean it will work for the rest of Africa. The people of Cameroon are comfortable with one leader for over 40 years. And this one here says this is why Europe doesn't take African politics seriously. Last one from Usman Hamidou. He says, what's actually wrong with Cameroonians? Can't they mobilize and do away with a senseless old man playing the scripts of the West? This is insanity. Well, one last thing to tell you before we go. Art Africa has a treasure trove of authentic African antiques that basically whisper stories of the continent's rich cultural heritage. Every item on display is testament to Africa's artistry. Well, our producer here on Unwrap Africa, Nonhlanhla Mthembu, went to see what it's all about.
We visited Art Gallery in Randburg, and Mpho Madipela took us on an African tour in their shop.
These ones, we call them Demji dolls. They're from Chad. Mostly they are used for fertility dolls. They're called fertility dolls. But you can also use it for decorations. These are the Basotho blanket. We have Shweshwe ones, which are these ones. The Ghana patchworks, you can use them for anything. Anything. It can be a wrap, a tablecloth. Then these are Ghana fans. We call them Ghanaian fans. We have the mud loaves. They're also handmade, the mud loaves. They're from Mali, but it's hand painted, so you cannot wash it. We also have these Tuareg curtains. These are curtains. They have smaller windows, not like ours, more like that mirror. So they use this. It's from the sub-Saharan people. And then we also have these Ethiopian crosses. They use this to pray. This is a Takana bowl. It's called a milk bowl. It's from Kenya.
That brings us to the end of this week's edition of Unwrap Africa. But stay tuned to SABC News because Tula Suza Simelani is standing by with another edition of the G20 Focus. I'll see you back here 8 p.m. on Sunday. Bye-bye.